This is December 19th, 2009. My name is William Scott Ray, grandson of Scott Askew Ray. We'll be doing an interview today. It's the day before your 80th birthday, right?
That's correct.
Did you have any nicknames when you were younger?
No, I didn't.
All right. Were you named after somebody else?
No, I think it was just my mother picked out the name Scott and Askew. She just liked them. I know there was an Askew family that she knew, thought they were nice folks, and I think that's where the Askew came from. I never knew them myself.
Okay. What is your birth date, your date of birth?
December 20, 1929.
And the date you were married?
March 15, 1952.
Now, I'm going to go back and cover something. Where is it that you were born?
In Atlanta.
And where were you married?
In Tacoma Park, Maryland, at Mary's home church, which was the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church.
Oh, right.
Tacoma Park is a suburb of Washington, D.C., just across the line in Maryland.
I know that you shared this story once today, but how is it that you met your wife?
I met her at a USO dance.
Oh.
And I had just arrived in Baltimore, Maryland from basic training, and I was going into the counterintelligence school there at Fort Holabird, Maryland. In my first week that I arrived, I saw on the bulletin board that we were all invited to the USO for the weekend. So that Friday night I went to the USO, and just as I arrived, the band leader yelled, "Change your partners." So I turned around, and there was Mary. We started dancing, and that was that.
And after the dance and after you talked for a while, did you arrange a time or a place to see her again?
Well, she lived not far from the USO. Baltimore is a real closely knit place, and so I walked her home. We got to know each other. We had sat at a table and talked for a while, and I think we liked each other. So I asked if I could walk her home, and she said yes, so I did. And then I, left her there and went on home. Went on back to the post by bus or streetcar, I forget which.
And did you tell her that you'd be seeing her again?
Yeah, I think we did. I think we did arrange that.
Okay. Do you remember the second time you saw her?
I don't remember the details. I remember picking her up. She stayed at a place called Meth Pro, which was a home for girls, ladies living away from home, and run by the Methodist Church. And so that's where I would see her.
Do you remember any of the dates that you went on after that? Anything stand out in your mind as being particularly fun?
Well, I remember when we were getting acquainted, we got to talking about politics, and I mentioned the fact that I had voted for Harry Truman. And then later in the conversation, somehow or other my birth date came up, and I mentioned that. She said, "Well, how could you be that young?" It turned out I was about a year and a half older. She was about a year and a half older than I am. I said, "Well," she said, "you said you voted for Harry Truman." I said, "Yeah, that's because in Georgia the voting age became 18. We were the first state in the union to have that."
Wow.
And I was 18 years old when I voted, so that explained that.
Okay. Do you remember meeting her father for the first time, or asking to letting him know that you wanted to marry Grandma?
Well, I don't think I might have, yeah. They were living in Tacoma Park, and then Mary and I were in Baltimore, which is not all that far from Tacoma Park, like 40 or 50 miles, something like that. So anyway, I was invited to come and stay at her home for 1 or 2 nights, and that's when I got to meet her family. We got to know each other, and that's when I met her father. Turned out her father had lived in Germany for a while and spoke German, and he was there before the First World War, helping someone else to write a book. He was doing research. That was his full-time job. And at that time, the time that I met him, he worked for the Library of Congress in Washington. So we kind of hit it off. He was pleased to know that I was interested in German too.
I never knew that before. I'll ask you a few questions I do know the answers to, but I want to have this recorded. What is your father's name?
Clark Ray, no middle name.
Okay. Not sure if I knew he didn't have a middle name. And what was his father's name?
Daniel Cicero, D.C.
Okay. Did he go by Daniel? Do you know?
Either that or D.C. sometimes.
Okay. And also...
But I never knew him. He died before I was born.
Oh, I never knew that either. What about your father's mother? What was her name?
Nancy Smith.
Okay. Do you know if she had any nicknames?
No, not to my knowledge.
And your mother, what's her name?
Ophelia, and she went by Ophi. That's what everybody called her. Ophie. Chastain.
What's her father's name?
Judson Rucker Chastain.
Did he go by any kind of nickname that you know of?
J.R. Chastain. They use initials a lot.
And also your mother's mother. You remember her name, Judson Rucker's wife?
Yes, it was Emma Greenwood was her maiden name, Emma Greenwood Chastain.
You just showed me pictures of them today.
Yes.
That's something I like to scan in when we get a chance. What are the see, I'm taking a look at one other thing. What was it like for you growing up in the time period that you did?
Well, I was born during the Depression. 1929 is when the market collapsed. I think it was in September of that year, and I was born in December of 29. I know that my parents did not have a lot of money, but they were both working, which was more than a lot of people could say. My mother was a school teacher, taught the 4th grade. And it was very good to have her steady income. My father was a lawyer, and was not making a lot of money, but he was getting by, you might say. And we lived in an area called Grove Park on the west side of Atlanta. That was kind of, I would say, lower middle class probably. And my mother was a school teacher at a school in that area, Center Hill. That's why they had chosen that place to live. So anyway, that's where I lived until I was 15 years old. Then we moved over to Peachtree Hills, which was a better neighborhood, and transferred to North Fulton, which was a better school. Got a better education there.
What kind of things did you like to do for fun when you were growing up?
Went to the movies a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you remember how much it costed?
50 cents, something like that. They built a movie theater in our neighborhood when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I had a newspaper route, and that's where I got the money to pay my way to the movie. I would go just about every Saturday.
Do you remember how old you were when you started your newspaper route?
Well, I started as a helper. I would have been 11 or 12. I think I was about 11 when I was helping the older boy that had the route. So I kind of got the hang of it, and then I think after I was 12 years old, I got my own route.
How did you usually get to the movies? Did you ride a bicycle or walk?
Walked, mostly.
How far do you think it was?
About a little over a quarter of a mile.
That's not too bad, I guess.
Yeah, maybe a third of a mile.
Okay. And you usually go with friends?
Sometimes, usually I go by myself, as I recall.
Did your family?
Well, we didn't have TV in those days. In fact, we didn't get a radio until I was about that age, around 11 or 12. We got our first radio, and we could listen to that.
Well, how did y'all usually get the news before you turned 11? Then newspaper or?
Off the newspaper.
Okay. Did your family move while you were growing up?
They moved when I was 15 years old.
Where'd they move from? Where'd
They
they go?
moved from Grove Park on the west side over to Peachtree Hills in the greater Buckhead area.
And what kind of house did you live in the first place you were at?
First place was a one-story bungalow, white house, in a wooden frame. And they own the house next door too, which they rented out. They had bought both of them.
Oh.
So that helped some. But I remember during the Depression for a long time that rental house just sat empty. They couldn't rent it.
Wow. And the next house, how was that? What was it like?
It was very much like ours. Okay. And they were right next door. Very small lots. The houses real close to each other.
What is your fondest memory of your father as you were growing up, or something that comes to mind about your father?
Well, I remember us I would go to the grocery store with him. We would walk there. That was about half a mile. And he would usually pull this red wagon along, which I would ride in when I was a kid. And then later on, I remember there were a couple of parks near us. Maddox Park was a little over a mile away on Bankhead. He would take me there, and we'd go swimming. Oh, that was fun, jumping in that big pool and swimming. And then there was another one about probably 2 to 3 miles away called Mosley Park, which was probably a little nicer. And I would go to it too sometimes. I had some friends in our area that lived on the next street over, and then they moved over to the Mosley Park area, and that's when I started going there. I'd go and visit them at their new home, and we'd just go swimming in that big pool. That was a lot of fun in the summertime to do that.
I have another question about your father, since we're talking about him. What is it that caused him to decide to be an attorney? Now, I will say one thing. His wife is from a line of attorneys. Do you think his wife had any influence on his decision to choose the field of law?
I imagine it probably had some influence, maybe not the main, not the only thing. But
so he wasn't already an attorney or going to law school when he met her?
No, they were both teachers. You know, that was in the days of the one-room country schoolhouses.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they taught. They met. I guess they were in the same school, or at least they were both teachers in that area, and got to know each other that way, and then got married.
What area? Do you know what area they met in? Was it Atlanta or was it some other?
No, it was LJ.
Oh, okay.
Now, my father grew up on a farm east of LJ, quite several miles, just across the county line in Fannin County. But then, when he was teaching in the LJ area. That's where he met Mother. Mother was from Morgan, and then she had moved there from a couple of counties away. And so he started his law practice in LJ, and he became the mayor of LJ. He was there. He was mayor, I think, in 1919 and 1920. And if you visit the city hall in LJ, they have pictures of all of the mayors, or nearly all of them. It's incomplete, but they have nearly all of them in the city's history, and my dad's picture is up there. In fact, I gave them the picture, and they framed it and put it up.
And he went to Mercer Law School, right?
Yes.
You say he was married already when he went to Mercer? Or was he single? Can you recall?
I believe he was single when he went to Mercer. I'm
okay.
Sure he was.
So he was probably already, you think, an attorney by the time that he had met? Well, let's see, he was a teacher.
I think he may have known Mother when he went to Mercer, but he went off, and that was 2 years, you know.
Oh, law school was 2 years then?
Yeah. In fact, I believe he only went 1 year. I think he was able to take the bar exam after 1 year, and he passed it.
Wow.
And he was ready to get married, so they did.
Oh. So he got. I guess he must have gotten married to her right after law school, but maybe have known her
Right after
before.
he finished. Yes, I think that's when they did get married, when he finished that.
That's interesting. Do you think they did a little bit of a long-term or long-distance relationship for part of that?
I think they kept in touch, writing letters, and he would come home occasionally.
Well, I didn't know I was the only one who did a long-distance relationship while in law school. That's interesting. There's a few more things I wanted to ask you. Did your parents or grandparents come to this state from another state?
No.
They were in Georgia.
My parents were both from Georgia. On my mother's side, her parents were from Georgia, I believe. I believe they were all, and then one generation back, their mothers were from South Carolina and dads were from North Carolina.
Did you ever get to meet any of your great-grandparents?
No, never. In fact, I only knew one of my grandparents. That was my grandmother on my mother's side. She lived with us for many years. And I remember she died in bed in our house.
That was Emma Greenwood?
Yes. She was what we might call a babysitter now. My mother and dad both worked, so Grandma was there to look after me when I got home from school.
I'm not sure if I ever knew that either. That's interesting. When did she start? About how old were you, do you think, when she started living with you guys?
I think I was just a baby, because she was there as long as I can remember.
Wow, you must have gotten to know her very well.
Oh, yeah.
Did she ever tell stories about her parents?
Not much. She didn't talk very much. I don't remember much about her parents.
So her personality, she was more quiet?
Yes, very quiet.
Did she have any kind of... I'm just assuming quiet people usually don't have much of a temper, but was she very mild-mannered as well?
Yes.
Like you are?
Yes. Yes, I am.
I've always pictured you that way.
I think I am,
yeah. Is she, would you say she's probably the oldest person that you were related to that you remember as a child?
Yes.
Okay. Was there any particular chore you really hated doing as a child?
Can't think of anything.
Okay.
I used to mow the lawn, but I didn't hate that. I kind of enjoyed it.
Was it
I work in the garden with Dad. He had a garden in the back.
You still enjoy gardening, right? Or until recently?
Well, I have until recently. I've been doing it lately.
Okay. What are your favorite things to grow?
Oh, vegetables like corn, pepper.
When you say pepper, do you mean like the bell peppers?
Yeah.
Okay.
And tomatoes.
I know for me, I like the really spicy ones like the jalapenos and things, but that's...
Well, anyway, I guess the tomatoes would be the second thing. Tomatoes and corn are the two that I remember the most.
What would you consider to be some of the most important inventions that have taken place during your lifetime? Imagine you've got a few you could pick from.
Television.
Yes.
And, I guess jet aircraft. They had airplanes back when I was born, but they were small.
Propeller type.
Yeah. But the jet aircraft would be another invention. Cars were invented before I was born. We never had a car until I was able to buy one myself when I was, I think, about a sophomore in college. I worked that summer and earned $250 that I saved and bought a car with it.
Was that the total price of the car, or was that a down payment?
That was a total price.
$250?
Yeah, for a little black convertible Ford.
Was it brand new?
39. No, it was used.
Okay.
Very used.
Did it have an odometer on it? Or do they even have the...
Oh yeah, the speedometer, sure.
No, an odometer, one that would show how many miles it had on it.
Oh. I don't think it worked, as I recall.
Okay. What kind of books did you like to read as you were growing up?
Yeah, I liked history books. And read a lot. Novels and some novels. I don't know, that's all I can remember, but I know I did a lot of when I was younger, my grandmother used to read stories to me, and I would sit and listen to them. And as I got older, I would start reading more myself.
When you were younger still, did you have any favorite toys that you can recall?
Well, we played cowboy a lot, so we had toy pistols and and holsters. And that was be involved in a lot of things we did. That's about all I remember in the way of toys.
All right.
Well, as a smaller child, I had tops and what do you call them? I don't know, that kind of thing that you would play indoors.
What were the schools like?
Well, schools were good. We had first through seventh grade, and then there was no junior high school in those days. You went right from junior high school from grammar school to high school, which we did. And in 1945 was when we moved over to North Fulton, so I went to West Fulton first, out in that area, and then 2 years, and then 2 years to North Fulton. Finished there in 47.
That was when you finished high school?
Yeah.
1947?
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting because I finished in 1997. Did you and your friends have any special place where you like to spend time or hang out together?
Well, going to the swimming pool, the park, was one place. I remember there was a time there when my good friends moved away, and there was a period when I didn't have any good close friends other than when I would go way over to the West End area where they lived. And so, no, we didn't. I don't remember any places like that.
You got your law degree.
When I was a child, that is, or even younger teenager.
You got your law degree from Emory, right?
Right.
Is that also where you got your undergraduate degree?
Yes.
Okay. Where were you living when you were going to college there?
On Fairhaven Circle and Peachtree Hills, Buckhead area.
Were you living with roommates or with family?
With family. That was our home. I would just catch the bus, and it was about an hour and a half trip riding the bus to down to about Ponce de Leon Avenue, then transferring and going over to Emory from there. Part of the time was just waiting for the bus, all the different places. So the whole trip took about an hour and a half, going and then coming back again.
Were there any fads during your youth that you remember vividly?
Any what?
Fads?
Fads? No.
Okay.
Not really. We were pretty. We didn't. We weren't rich, but we weren't terribly poor. But I know we didn't waste money on things like fads. Our folks wouldn't have approved of that.
Now, how old were you when you started dating?
I think 15.
Okay. Do you remember your first date?
Yeah. I had called one girl and asked her for a date, and she turned me down, and boy, she was kind of ugly about it. Like, what are you asking me that for? I said, what are you doing? I'm staying home. What do you think I'm doing? So anyway, when she turned me down, and I called this other girl, and the other girl was delighted. So what we did, we got on a bus, rode downtown to a movie, saw the movie, rode back to her house. Walked her to her house from the bus stop, and then went back home. Caught the bus back home. So a lot of bus riding on that.
And see, where is it that you were married? You may have mentioned that once before,
Tacoma Park, Maryland.
That's right. Now I imagine that was closer to her family, to your wife's family.
That's right. We got married in her family church.
Were any members of your family able to make that long trip all the way up there?
No, my parents were getting old. See, they were both over 40 when I was born. I was the only child. And by that time, their health just wasn't good enough for them to travel like that.
I see.
But I was in touch with them by phone, and they were very pleased with what was happening.
And did you all have a honeymoon?
Yeah, well, our honeymoon was that we got a ride back from Tacoma Park back to Baltimore. We stayed in a hotel for the weekend, and then I had to report back to duty at the Army post that following Monday morning.
Wow.
And then we found an apartment out there that was within walking distance. I could walk right onto the post from there, and Mary could get on a trolley or a bus and ride to. She was working too. She would ride to her workplace.
And another very obvious question I know the answer to, we just want to record. How many children did you have altogether?
3.
And what are their, I feel foolish asking, but what are their names? Obviously I know what those are, but also their birth dates, if you can recall that, and where they were born.
Well, Harry Ray, his birthday is December 24. Gosh, I can't remember.
I know it's 1950 something, but I can't remember if it was 54 maybe?
54 is what I think. Let's see, better check that.
Okay.
And then Carol Ray, birthday is November the 6th. I can't remember that year either offhand. 61 maybe, that sounds about right. Then Paul Ray, I think his birthday's in November, but we better look that one up. I can't remember.
Okay. Where were they? Where were each of them born? Were they all born here in Atlanta?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Harry was born in Germany.
Of course.
When I was stationed over there, when he was 6 months old.
Was it Stuttgart?
We came back, yes.
Okay.
Army post hospital.
I guess I knew that. I don't know why I was saying Atlanta. I guess I'm just thinking about Atlanta since I'm here.
Yeah.
And if you had to do it all over again, would you change anything about the way you raised your family?
No, I think it all worked out.
I'd say
as well as you could expect.
Certainly. Considering how many families struggle, I'd say yours is quite a success story.
I think so.
What did you find most difficult about raising children?
Oh, having to tell them I did something wrong, having to punish them. I remember I took a bolo paddle and gave your dad some spankings with that. But I don't know. And then I decided, well, that doesn't do that much good, and I quit spanking them. I thought, I think your dad was the only one that got any of that spanking. But they were all well behaved. They didn't get out of line much at all.
What did you do instead of spanking? Did you try to
give them a lecture
about
how bad it was and not to do that anymore?
Well, I ought to try that with William. A lot of times I feel the same way, that spanking just doesn't get me anywhere.
Yeah.
I tried doing timeouts and other things, but I think that sometimes he probably doesn't need a good talking to. He's a hard-headed little fella. I sure love him.
Yeah.
What's most rewarding about being a parent that you found?
Well, I think having a growing family, having children and having grandchildren, getting together with them, just the interaction with your family. That's the most important thing.
I definitely agree.
Even the work that you do, in my case, law practice and earning a living, is so you can provide for the family, make sure they all get a good education, good upbringing.
Did you always want to be a lawyer when you grew up, when you were little?
Pretty much. I can't remember ever seriously considering, well, when I was in college and got so interested in the German language, I thought a little bit about being a German teacher, but I was drawn back to the law again. my dad had been a lawyer, and other lawyers in the family, and I just felt like that was my place I belonged. So that's where I ended up.
I'm curious, what kind of your father did general practice, right?
Yes.
What kind of hours did he work usually? When did you usually see him come home?
Oh, he'd come home leave about 5, get home about 5:30 to 6, more like 6.
Wow, he would leave for the office around 5 in the morning?
Oh, no, until I come back.
Oh, okay.
And he would leave, I guess, I don't remember too well. I'm around 8:30 or so, I think. Got there about 9. Also, he worked on Saturday, just about either half a day or 2/3 of a day. I know a lot of Saturdays, when I got old enough, I would ride the streetcar downtown to his office, and then I'd go to a movie, which was about just just right down the street from his office, and see that movie every Saturday, and then come back.
Did y'all ever talk about the practice of law or talk about cases?
Oh, he would talk about some of them, yeah.
Did he ever do any criminal defense?
A little, not much.
Okay, I'd have to ask, considering the work that I do.
Yeah, I know. No.
And do you recall him ever having a jury trial?
Yeah, I remember sitting in on one of them. He brought me there along with him, and they were trying a case before a jury. I really don't remember anything about it other than him up there cross-examining a witness. That was stuck in my mind.
Tell me about that. Did you remember how you felt when you saw that, or what you thought about what was going on?
Well, that was the first time I had ever experienced a trial, so it was just very interesting, and I was hoping he would win. As I remember, I think he did, but I'm not. It's all kind of vague in my mind now.
Certainly, cross-examining can be one of the most interesting parts.
Yeah.
You can really be in for a wild ride depending on the witness.
Yeah.
What are some of the hardest choices that you've had to make?
Well, continuing my education, from ground up, going on to high school and so forth, those choices were pretty much made for me. And then continuing on at Emory. But I know Emory was very, very difficult, particularly about the first year or so that I was there, but then I kind of got more with it, and it got easier to handle.
Where did you like to study? Did you ever study in the library, or did you almost always study at home?
Yeah, I studied in the library at school.
That's my favorite place, too.
That a lot.
I just feel like I'm so easily distracted when I come home to study.
Mm-hmm. I did both. Studied some in the library and studied at home as well.
Okay. What person had the most positive influence on you?
Hard to say. My mother and my father both had an influence. My mother being a teacher, I remember her lecturing me about grammar. I say, I ain't got none of that. Oh, that's not the right way to say that. I don't have any. And she would, when I'd bring some of my little friends around and they'd say the same thing, she would lecture them too. It's something having a 4th grade teacher for your mother, I'll tell you. But I got a lot of lessons in grammar just from her, right on the spot when I did something wrong.
What wars were fought?
Hi, Dad.
Hi, William. This is my son, William. I was wondering what wars were fought during your lifetime.
What wars?
Yes, sir.
Well, the Second World War started when I was 11 years old. I mean, we got into it in 41. It was already started before that. I was 11. And then after that, the next one was the Korean War. That's when I was in the service. I was in the service, but I went to Europe, thank goodness, instead of to Korea. And there was the threat there was from the from Russia, the USSR, and there was some danger that they might, they had a lot of troops concentrated over there in East Germany, and I was in West Germany. We were there to kind of fend them off if they started something, but fortunately, nothing came of it. Then, of course, I remember the Vietnam War, and then the problems that we're having in Afghanistan now.
Now, where were you, and what were you doing when you found out about Pearl Harbor being attacked?
Well, it was on a Sunday, December the 7th, and I think we heard it on the radio. I was at home, yeah.
About, more or less, if you can recall, about how old were you?
Oh, well, I was 11.
Okay.
And 41.
How did you feel about it when you heard the news?
Well, it was terrible. I was thinking, well, I'll probably end up in the Army or even the Navy, I was thinking about it. But here I was, just 11 years old, and fortunately the war was over before I was old enough to go in.
Do you recall yourself or any adults talking about the possibility of the Japanese invading the continental U.S.?
Well, there was the fear that might happen, yeah.
Now, I'll ask again a similar question. Where were you and what were you doing when you found out President Kennedy was assassinated?
Well, I was at home, and I think we saw it on TV. It was probably a rerun, but that's where we were.
Now, how did you feel when you saw that?
That was terrible. I had not supported President Kennedy, but I still thought it was terrible that our president would be assassinated, shot by somebody that just wanted to take destiny over in his own hands.
And do you recall where you were and what you were doing when 9/11 happened, the attack?
No, I can't remember. I think I was probably home. I heard about it on the radio in a car, maybe, and saw it on TV later.
How did your family usually receive? Well, I'm sorry, I covered that. You usually receive the news by newspaper until you all got a radio, probably around the time you were 10 or 11.
Yeah, and then later on, when I was halfway through high school, we got a television. I think I was probably a senior in high school, or even out of it, when we got our first television.
You mentioned being in the military and going to USO. What rank were you when you completed USO? Were you lieutenant?
When I went to the USO? No, I never was an officer.
Oh.
I went in as a private.
Oh, I don't think I
came
knew
out
that.
as a corporal.
Oh, okay.
3 years later.
And you were in counterintelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That was my reason for enlisting. I had a cousin's husband was telling me about how great it was to be in counterintelligence, and that I ought not to wait and be drafted, but go ahead and enlist and ask for that, and that's what I did. So that's how I got to serve there.
have you had any major illnesses or health problems in your life?
Well, as a small child, I did. I had appendicitis, and I had to remove my appendix. Now, this was all before I even entered school. I was like I was 4 years old, thereabouts. And scarlet fever. Got very seriously ill with that. Overcame it finally. Those two things, but after that, my health has been pretty good.
Okay. Have you ever been a victim of a crime?
No major crime. I know someone. One time I accidentally left the garage door open here, and there was a guy that lived right down the street, a young guy, teenager, and we know that it was him. He was walking up the street, and he saw that, and he walked into the house. I had left my wallet right there on the kitchen table. He walked in and got that wallet, and then left, and then I noticed the wallet was missing, and I got a phone call a little later, and it was from this boy's mother, and she said that my wallet was found on the street down there, right on the corner, that corner house, and so it only had a few dollars in it. I mean, the dollars were gone, but everything else was there. So I came down and got it. And I think she knew that her son had done it, and that's what I knew, but we never couldn't prove it. I reported to the police, and they said they just made a report of it, but I didn't accuse him. I realized there wasn't enough proof to stand up, but he was just the logical one, and it ended up down there at his house.
Yeah.
So that's our conclusion about that.
I'll ask a very broad question. What are your religious beliefs?
Well, I believe in God, and I mean, after all, look at this world all around us. Look at the universe. What an involved, complicated thing it is. And it didn't just happen. We don't know of anything in our experience that didn't have some beginning. Something started it. There must have been somebody there that started and put the whole thing in motion, and that person, that being was God. He is God. And I believe very strongly in the Christian belief, the following teachings of Christ. If we live our life according to his principle, we'll have a good life, and we'll be beneficial to those around us. And I've tried to raise my family, on those principles. And I'm tolerant of people like the Muslims and so on. I don't think they're banned from heaven just because they're Muslims, although I don't accept their beliefs, but they're raised that way. And they believe basically the same thing, that there was a God who created us all. And we are all alike on that. So I guess that's it.
And shifting gears some, what are some of your favorite things to do now? Some of your favorite hobbies and activities?
Well, since I've retired, right after we retired, we loved to travel. But, when I went through this period of having the prostate cancer and the radiation, it made me weak. I've got my strength back now. But just reached a point we didn't have the energy to do the traveling and that sort of thing that we had been doing before. So what we do now is things like the SAR, that meeting like we went to this morning.
The Sons of the American Revolution, right? The Sons of the American Revolution.
Yes, Sons of the American Revolution. That's once a month for me. And there's a bunch from my high school, about 10 to 15 of us that meet for lunch once a month. That's from my class. Most of them are from my class, a few of them are from other classes, all at North Fulton. And those are two things that I can remember doing on a pretty regular basis. Being with my grandchildren, like you with JP. JP comes over frequently on weekends, not every weekend, but frequently. Going to church with him. And I guess church work in general. We have board meetings. I'm on the official board of the church. That's once a month we meet. And so that sort of thing.
All right. Well, Grandpa, thanks for spending so much time with me on this important day. And appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad. I think that's an excellent idea, and you will have it recorded and make it available for your cousins, I guess.
Yes, sir. I can email it to anyone who's interested.
That's good. I want you to do that.
Thanks again.
Okay.